The world of sports is filled with personalities, iconic players, legendary coaches, owners who always know where the camera is at all times. You've got newspaper columnists that were must-read whenever something big happened, the local sports anchor who brought you highlights and interviews directly into your living room. There are so many front-facing people in this business. It's easy to forget there are exponentially more people behind the scenes who are important and keep this whole thing running. Camera operators, board ops back at network control, producers in the truck, engineers, the list goes on. For instance, you might not know Rusty Helser, who has been at Capitol Broadcasting for decades, but you do hear his work every day. He literally grew up on NC State's campus, helped establish radio networks, and developed personal relationships with those sports personalities I referenced at the start. But you would never know about it unless you knew or worked with Rusty. But that's what this episode is for, so that you can know his story too.
The Triangle has the most unique landscape for sports. 3 major universities along Tobacco Road with rabid fan bases, a Stanley Cup champion, an NFL team right down the road, and heavily invested transplants. Not to mention an interesting mix of sports teams that were. Joe Ovies brings you a brief history of Triangle sports, a candid conversation with those who help shape why sports matters here.
All right, Rusty, this might be the most difficult episode of A Brief History of Triangle Sports because it's trying to get you to talk about you. You don't like doing that, Rusty.
Oh, it's okay.
For quick context, I was at NC State from 1997 through 2001, and I worked at the college radio station, and WKNC would carry NC State baseball games, still does carry NC State baseball games on 88.1, and there was always a little Post-it note on the control board in the studio, and it said, Rusty Helser, Master Control, and a phone number for what was Master Control somewhere down Hillsborough Street. I knew it was up the way. I didn't know exactly where it was. And every so often I would get a call from a gentleman named Rusty saying, everybody good? Everybody there? Any issues? Or if there was an issue, I would call you. I never met you, etc. I just knew here was Rusty, Master Control. Fast forward to 2009. When 850 The Buzz is acquired by Capitol Broadcasting and we merge with 99.9 The Fan, and lo and behold, I meet Rusty from Master Control. Like, wait a minute, that's you. You know what I never realized back in 2009, Rusty, is just how long you've been doing this and the things that you have seen. It's pretty amazing, Rusty.
Yeah, I know where all the bodies are buried. That's the reason I'm still here.
So what I did not realize and what I wanted to talk to you about, and I think is important for listeners of this podcast to understand, is that sports in the Triangle has affected just about anybody who has lived here for an extended period of time. You grew up here, and you saw a completely different era of sports, not just of Raleigh, but of sports in general. We're talking about seeing football games at Riddick Stadium on NC State's campus, not Carter Finley Stadium. We're talking about Pistol Pete Maravich playing pickup games with you. So I want to start there. What are your earliest memories of being around NC State? Is it selling concessions at Riddick Stadium? Is it being at Reynolds Coliseum? What is it for you?
The first time I was allowed to go to a game, I was 5 years old. My parents were trying to protect my hearing. It was very loud in Reynolds at that time.
Of course.
And there was a lot of smoke in Reynolds at that time. But Big O was coming to the Dixie Classic.
We're talking Oscar Robertson.
Yes.
Okay.
But I didn't know who Big O was. I was 5 years old. And then there was a guy from Michigan State called Jumpin' Johnny Green. Oh, man, when you're 5 years old, you want to see somebody that's like that. So they said, Rusty, we'll let you go to this first game. My dad went to the first game at Reynolds in 49 and then started doing concessions on the Case Athletic Center side of the Coliseum. And our family was just always there. Mm-hmm. I grew up a half a block from NC State. When my mom would open the back door, she'd say, okay, kids, here's your playground. That was NC State. Mm-hmm. So I started going to games at Reynolds. We also had friends of the college. And, I mean, for instance, Senator John Kennedy spoke there in, September of 1960. And I worked that night because my dad wanted me to hear Senator Kennedy, and he was running for president. Mm-hmm. Little did I know, in November 22nd, 1963, my fifth, sixth grade combo teacher came in, and she hung her head down, and she said, "The president has been shot." Mm-hmm. And she hung her head down again, and I raced out the door and ran downstairs to use the principal's phone and said, "I want 500 papers at my usual drop-off for the Raleigh Times. I want that at my usual drop-off a block from Hillsborough Street."
Hold on. You were delivering papers for the Raleigh Times, too?
Yes. Uh-huh. I started delivering papers for the Raleigh Times when I was 9 years old.
Okay. And you knew this, obviously, is a huge historical event, and you realized it's time to...
Yeah, I had to act.
Okay.
And so I said, in 2 hours, I want the papers at my usual drop-off near Hillsborough Street. And as I was walking up Brooks Avenue, people were stopping me mm-hmm. and buying these newspapers, which had a picture of Kennedy shot and laying.
Yeah.
And I just was like, here's a paper. And I sold 500 papers in, a matter of 45 minutes.
Wow.
At the A&P on Hillsborough Street, which was right across from NC State. And while I was there, people around me were telling me, "Oh, they've changed the NC State Wake Forest game. It's not going to be Saturday afternoon. It's going to be tonight." Mm-hmm. Because there was uncertainty. I mean, we had just had the Cuban Missile Crisis. No one knew who
was in charge, right?
Yeah, and who was behind the shooting of Kennedy? Mm. Was it the Cubans? Was it the Russians? So they went ahead and played the State Wake Forest game because Wake Forest was already in town Friday afternoon.
Okay.
And so they played the game Friday night. So I worked that game as I would with my family. When we did games at Riddick, high school football on Friday night, mm-hmm. home varsity football on Saturday afternoon, and we could also do freshman football on Saturday night.
Freshman football?
Yes, freshman football.
That's not a concept I'm familiar with.
Yeah, because there was no freshman eligibility back then.
True.
And State would play the Carolina freshmen. They'd play the Duke freshmen. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was what it was on Saturday night. And we would go in and set up ahead of time for the game. We would sell concessions during the game, and my father picked the visiting side at Riddick so his sons could meet different people from all over the country. Mm-hmm. Like Maryland came, and the people complained, "Oh, you don't have hot dogs?" "No, we don't have hot dogs." Well, we have hot dogs at our game.
Yeah.
It was something we could think about in the future. But Maryland, Kinston came up for a high school game with Raleigh High School, which was Broughton at the time.
Yeah.
And when Greensboro, Grimsley came, and different schools would come from all over. Rocky Mount, different schools would come to Riddick Stadium on Friday night. The Saturday afternoon games, when it was NC State varsity, my brothers and I started collecting the liquor bottles after the game was over, and we just noticed, gosh, look at all these liquor bottles.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody would want these.
Uh-huh.
And going back to say, well, my father, when he was 9 years old, was the chief breadwinner in his family. And he wanted his sons to be working when they were 9 years old. That's why I did the papers. That's why I worked at Riddick and Reynolds and different places. And he also wanted us to experience more than he was able to. He worked on a golf course during the daytime, went to school probably 1P to 3P, and then he washed dishes at night because his father had had a stroke and he was the chief breadwinner at 9 years old. So he wanted us to also be doing this. So we worked.
You worked a lot.
Starting when I was 9 years old.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
My brothers figured out, hey, Rusty's carrying papers. He can carry my route. Or Rusty's carrying papers, he can carry my route. So I had the largest Raleigh Times newspaper route in the city of Raleigh by the time I was 10 years old.
Look at you hustling, Rusty.
I was hustling.
You were hustling.
I didn't realize it.
Liquor
but
bottles, you're getting recycling. You're getting the recycling fee for that, right?
I missed the second and the third grade because my lungs weren't developed.
Okay.
And my brother had rickets, which is why we moved from St. Paul, Minnesota to North Carolina to begin with. Rickets is a severe condition where you have a huge vitamin D deficiency. Mm-hmm. So they said, move south, you guys.
Yeah, go see where there's more sun. It's not as snowy and dark all the time. So
and the only thing I knew is my father had played golf with a lot of generals on the West Coast. And I don't know who he played with. He wouldn't talk about the war too much.
Yeah.
But after he passed, we found out that he taught math and radar on the West Coast and in the Pacific and then back at the West Coast. And sometime in there, at his office, they planned the protection of the West Coast during World War II.
Okay.
And so we knew, gosh, my dad must be pretty smart, Yes. And so when I missed the second and the third grade, I could go and set up at Reynolds. My father could use the scoreboard to give me math problems to solve. Mm-hmm. And that extended my schooling.
Learning at Reynolds Coliseum.
Learning at Reynolds Coliseum when I was growing up.
Yeah, Pistol Pete's this Raleigh legend. And I will make a joke like, Rusty, you probably played pickup hoops with Pete, didn't you? And you just say, point blank, straight face, yeah, I did actually, XYZ. But come on, really? You're out here playing hoops with Pistol Pete?
I did.
Okay.
Of course, Pete Maravich played basketball at Broughton, and I grew up near NC State. Pete lived at NC State when his father was an assistant coach there.
Yeah, Press Maravich.
And boom, you're going to run into Pete on a basketball court.
Makes sense.
Every time I saw him, and he would talk to my father a lot, during the NC State games, he would just kind of be around, and he'd always have a basketball in his hand. I was like, I never saw him. I may have seen him once or twice without a basketball in his hand.
Yeah.
So we played a lot of pickup. And, I've played basketball with a lot of different people. One time when I was teaching high school in Greensboro, I got the call, and it was a snow day. And that afternoon, I played Neal, and I passed Curly Neal when I was going to the Y to play basketball. And in the back was Bob McAdoo, my gosh.
Now, you have the distinction of being you have the distinction of being hit in the head by Pistol Pete, though.
Yeah, I did get hit in the head with Pistol Pete. And Pete was always...
teachable moment.
He really was trying to make all the people around him better. Mm-hmm. And on the other side of the court, I'm kind of looking at what defense was being set up. And Pete takes the ball with his left hand on the other side of the court and goes... whoosh, all the way across the court, boom, right in my head, and goes, Rusty, always watch the ball. I'm like, I did after that.
Of course.
And, of course, when Pete was around, I always watched the ball because I was afraid he was going to hit me in the head.
Yeah, you don't want that happening
But
again.
he was always teaching everybody. He always made everybody better on the court.
And then, again, I will make a joke. For instance, the Dixie Classic, the point shaving scandal. Oh, Rusty, I'm sure you had a little – obviously you're too young at this point, but I'll make a joke. Yeah, you probably had some money on that game, didn't you? But – you actually were aware enough that something fishy was going on?
Yeah, well, the point scandal that I was aware of was 1961.
Okay.
And I was out doing my homework, and different things out before the game started, and also working. But I was watching the guys warming up. And one of the guys, Stan Nierowski, the year before, he made every one of these shots. And before some of the games, I was like, this isn't the same. He's not. He's either in a real slump or something really funky has happened, and he was maybe a junior or senior at this point.
All right.
And about halfway through the year, Duke comes to town, and of course we're setting up, and I'm setting up, and then I'm going home because I had homework to do and stuff. And my brothers stayed for the game, but they said, they're throwing the books out. And I said, well, what do y'all mean? He said, they're not going to point shave tonight. And I was like, oh, well, that means we might have a chance. And Terry Litchfield, one of the guys who got caught, hit a shot from the corner, and State beat Duke that night. That was amazing, And later, my father was reading the newspaper, and he says, Rusty, I just wanted you to see this. And there in the paper, Stan Nyrowski, one of the players, was caught for speeding on Western Boulevard after the game was over. I said, okay, that locks it down. And then the other game I was telling you about, a game that was on television. Not all the games were on TV back then, but it was State and Georgia Tech. And State was up 24. And, of course, I start doing house chores and going out in the yard, doing stuff. And I come back in, and they're up by 4. And I'm like, ruh-roh.
What's going on here?
Yeah, what's going on here?
Yeah.
What are they doing? Trying to do a point spread thing? It was because in '59 they won the ACC championship.
Sure.
These were good teams, and they should be beating these teams by a lot more than they're beating them.
Not when you got to worry about a spread, apparently.
Yeah, not when you have to worry about a spread.
You understand that some people might be listening to this and going, "There's no way. There's no way all these things are happening as you're watching these things." But you were like, for instance, I'll even make the joke. David Thompson gets in trouble at NC State because of these pickup basketball games that were taking place in the 70s during his recruitment. And this all follows a theme. I'll make a joke. Rusty, you were probably in one of those pickup games. And then you'll hit me with a well, actually.
Well, I'll just preface this by saying we, as a family, my mother had an operation post-World War II that she survived that no one else had survived. So she had to rest every day from like noon to 3.
Okay.
And so kids, like I said earlier, when she'd open the back door, whoosh, y'all get out of here.
Yeah.
So NC State was just some place we always went. We knew everyone. When I entered school as a freshman at NC State.
What year is this? When you were a freshman?
Fall of 1970.
Okay.
Probably in August, I was going by, and I noticed they were having orientation. So I said, well, here, I'll go to orientation. Well, they ran out of people to lead groups around, and they said, Rusty, would you lead this group around?
Yeah, you know the campus.
And so I took them to all the I took them to Dabney Hall, where there's the 200-seat. I said, you're going to have a class in here because it's going to be English or history, and it's going to be 200 people in here. I said, get used to that, because you're going to have classes like that. Then it'll start paring down, And I took them all over campus. I even took them to the milk plant, and I got them some really good ice cream. And they go, and you made this? I said, well, I had help, but yes, I made this. And they said, well, what standing are you here at State? And I said, well, I haven't entered yet. She said, well, what do you know this? And I said, well, I grew up here.
Yeah.
I grew up here.
Yeah.
So I worked at the milk plant. I worked at different places on campus.
And then you're in Reynolds.
And that's how I paid for my college.
That's how you paid, and you're hanging out in Reynolds.
And I'm hanging out, for the David Thompson story.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually going out to the track.
Oh, okay, because you were running.
Every day I would run. And I was going out to the track, and one of the orange doors on the side there where the gym was opens up, and this guy, Rusty, get in here. You got to see this. And I see Eddie Beanbach on the court. And then on down the court, coming up the way, I see this kid, and I'm like, gosh, he's young. I said, he's about my age. And the guy said, that's David Thompson. And I said, oh, okay, well, let me sit and watch for a minute.
Because David Thompson at that point was a highly touted recruit.
Yeah, he was.
People knew who he was.
People knew he was coming to State.
Yeah.
Now, back then, we haven't seen pictures of him on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I don't think. Yeah, internet wasn't even a figment.
Was not a thing at that point.
No. So no one knew exactly, but I was like, that must be David Thompson. And so we're playing in this pickup game. And, I wasn't playing. I was watching the pickup game. And it was just a pickup game in the summertime. I mean, nobody was really stressing themselves. He went up and got a rebound. I got a rebound, and I was like, wow, he's got some hops.
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't a whole lot going on. They played a little bit, and everybody shook his hand.
It was that super nondescript. Little did you know.
Yeah. And, little did I know this would be a violation. And if somebody just a fly on the wall just was watching this and they were going, gosh, that can't be some kind of NCAA violation. And it was just a little pickup game.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was not much going on.
When did you start getting into broadcast? When did you start working at radio stations? When did this happen?
No, I got I finished at NC State, and NC State did not have my major.
Okay.
So, I worked one summer where I was still working at the milk plant, and they were like, "You're going to leave?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but they don't have my major."
Yeah.
And so I was getting a teaching degree, so I went to Appalachian to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And I had 2 years at Appalachian, and I just had a spread major where my wife Norma was at Appalachian, and she was she had a speech degree where she could teach speech. They had a small campus TV station. She did the weather on the campus TV station. She did mornings doing radio at WASU.
So hold up, Norma was the first one to get into broadcast?
Yes, she was the one in broadcasting.
She was the broadcast. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to summer school. I'd just turn the radio on and hear do the
Norma.
morning.
Yeah, there you go.
Doing the morning, morning. She was morning DJ.
Got it.
And I was going to French history class. There you go. So I just had a spread major where I could teach anything.
Okay.
So where Norma got a TV job, I was just going to say she got the job in August. Then I could walk in and say, well, what do y'all need? Oh, well, we need a math teacher this quarter, and next quarter we might need a chemistry teacher or a history teacher. And I said, oh, well, I can do that.
And you can be plugged in.
And then I could be plugged in. So that's how that happened. The schools in some of the places weren't the greatest. So Norma steered me to someone that said, Rusty, maybe you could maybe be in radio because you love radio.
So this brought you back to Raleigh? Or was this happening?
This started actually in Wilmington.
In Wilmington, okay.
Yeah, and I worked for a station called WHSL, and I worked there just a short time, and then we moved to Raleigh, and I was here, and Norma had been interviewed for several jobs in this area, and we just decided to move to Raleigh, and she got a job at RTI, where she was with his parents.
Yes.
And instead of working she had an offer with 5 for PM Magazine.
Okay.
And but she decided to go with the RTI job because it paid double.
There you go.
So we were like, okay.
Money factors into these things.
We'll take that. But then...
so what brought you to Capital Broadcasting?
Well, I had a job offer at Durham Life with Frank Lassiter, and Frank wanted me to do news. And I went down for the interview, and standing in the door was a guy I grew up with here in Raleigh, Martin Seligson, and Martin said, I've just been hired as the sales manager at REL. I said, Rusty, I don't care about this news job with Frank. I said, I want you to go over to Western Boulevard right now and apply.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, Frank's going to hire me. I need some money, that kind of thing. And he said, nope, go do this first. And it was about 10 a.m. in the morning, and I walked in at RAL and saw Marilyn Blankenship, and she said, I think we might be able to use you. There's a guy at RAL FM who may give you a call later today. And Tack Atayak, who does the PA at PNC Arena for NC State games, Tack
big-time DJ.
basically hired me that afternoon.
Okay.
I walked in. He does the usual interview process. He has all this stuff he has to sign and all this stuff, and he goes, Rusty, do you know Jimmy Dahl? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, he worked with Norma down in Wilmington. He says, and Jimmy Dahl says that if you're related to Norma Helser, gosh, I'd hire him. I'd hire him, Tack. If you're related to Norma Helser, I'd hire him.
Okay.
And so Tack hired me on the spot and showed me around the station, and I started working doing commercials and editing music. And
this leads to Capital Broadcasting, and people might not know this. People will associate Capital Broadcasting as the flagship for NC State athletics. But at the time, when you come over to Capital Broadcasting, this is what, 1980?
1979.
1979. The Capital Broadcasting Network started to they were building out a sports network. You had NC State. Duke was also part of that Capital Broadcasting sport. If I'm not mistaken, there was a handful of ACC teams that were part of the Capital Broadcast Sports Network, correct?
Duke was the first.
They were the first, okay.
Duke was the first, and they had ties to the Goodman family, so that became the first one we did. And we had Duke, and the first real games I started, you could say board opping, but then we were also doing all the commercials for Duke, and we were doing all the commercials for Virginia Tech. So I started working with Virginia Tech, and I started working with Jeff Charles, and I would,
for most people relate to as the voice of the ECU Pirates.
And this was his first college job, was Virginia Tech. Then he moved on to East Carolina. But I started actually being there for every Virginia Tech game, including one where it was like the pandemic. I mean, there were 9 people at the game, and they were all security guards. It was like 3 feet of snow outside. Nobody could get to the game.
Yeah, nobody wants
so
to go
they
to
just
that.
went ahead and played. And Jeff made a note on the air. He said, there are more sparrows here in the arena than there are people. So they're all just trying to stay warm, But we did do that, did all the Virginia Tech, and then we started doing Virginia. Warren Swain was the play-by-play guy at the time. And we started doing Virginia. And the funny thing about this is your mixtape that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would do every break for them on a cassette, on a mixtape.
Not on carts? It was all on a tape?
It was all on a cassette.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And there was a reason for that. Say they had 32 breaks during the game.
Yeah.
Probably 29 or 28. But I would put all the cassettes queued up, put them all in a box, and they'd play the open or the first break, throw it in the trash can. So at the end of the game, they had nothing to carry out of there. So they just had their regular equipment. So it saved on having to carry carts and all this other stuff with them all the time. So I would do this on cassette, maybe Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and I would take them over to Cameron Village and mail them to them.
Okay.
And
this throwing away of tapes is important for something we're going to get to here in a little bit. Because as you're helping out with the network and you're producing these commercials and the imaging and being back here to make sure that these things ended up running, you're installing satellites too at this point, right?
Yes. Paul Matthews, our chief engineer, and we actually would do about. Paul did a lot by himself, but I would start going out with him. We did maybe 2 or 3 in one day. One day we were in Greenville, put a dish up, it was like 104.
Yeah.
I would be underneath the dish, and Paul would lift it up. Rusty, you doing okay? I said, yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm working underneath here. So just give me some air every once in a while. But it was hot.
Yeah.
And then we went to Durham, and the guide complained that during the 10:55 a.m. newscast, there was this outage every day at 10:55. And so we parked the truck about 10:30, quarter to 11 the next morning, and we watched the field where the dish was in, and noticed that, they went out at quarter to 11 and about 10 to 11 and moved the gate, and all the cows came out. So then we noticed, all the cows are going over to the dish.
Oh, that would cause some interference.
And they're scratching their backs.
Oh, jeez.
So we built the cows a separate dish.
Uh-huh.
And so they could scratch on that dish, and then we kind of made a fence around the real dish so they wouldn't get this interference every day at 10:55. And from there, we went to put up other dishes. We went to Franklin and Murphy, all in that same junket.
Oh, jeez. Okay. Let's fast forward to the arrival of Jim Valvano. You're helping out with the network. You're setting up satellite dishes. You got the tapes, you got the broadcast stuff, and he shows up at NC State in 1980. And part of this Capital Broadcasting Sports Network, coaches shows had already existed. Okay.
Yeah.
But the thing that's always been relayed to me is that the Valvano arrangement was different from the other coaches' show because he actually was allowed to have essentially his own segment to talk about whatever he wanted to talk about. It wasn't your traditional coaches' show. What was the name of the Valvano? It was like Valvano's Thoughts, or what was it called?
It was, he had a commentary that ran on our network called Valvano's Viewpoints.
Valvano's Viewpoints, okay. And this was just, a couple minutes where he could talk about whatever he wanted to talk about?
It was a 3 or 4 minute commentary and a 1 minute commercial. And so it equaled 5 minutes. And he could talk about whatever he wanted to talk about.
How did you find yourself part of this?
Well, he walked into the building one day, and I was just working for FM and RAL. And he comes in and he goes, "Hey, I want to do a radio show." And I said, "Well, who are you?" He says, "Oh, in a couple of hours, I'm going to be named head basketball coach at NC State." And I said, "Well, who are you?" "Oh, my name's Jim Valvano." And I said, "Well, Jim, hold on just a second. Let me find somebody down the hall." And I went down the hall and I found Ray Wilkinson, who was vice president of radio at the time. And I said, "Ray, come on up here. I have somebody I want you to meet." And Jim was just all over the place. He was just, "Yeah, hey, and this.
And then, you would expect that.
And then when he saw Ray, he shook Ray's hand and he was like, "Yeah, in a couple of hours, I'm going to be named head basketball coach. I'm all excited about being here, And he kind of went into a little bit of his background, and then I went on about my business. I mean, he said something about Iona, I think, and play basketball at Rutgers, that kind of thing. So I looked at him and I said, I had seen him play in an NIT game, and I couldn't even remember it. But later on, I thought about it. It was the NIT championship game that was carried locally here on television. So I said, that's that guy.
Yeah.
So we started doing demo coaches shows, and that didn't really make it on the air, but just so we could have something maybe to sell or something to project. This is when we're going to start doing the shows. Because I had been doing the Mike Krzyzewski shows, around the same time. So we were starting to do these different coaches shows.
Okay. So how often would you find yourself just with Valvano? I mean, would he come to the studio? Would you have to go to him to record things in the basketball office? How'd that work?
We were on Hillsborough Street.
So you could just walk across the street.
Near St. Mary's College. And so he would come over. I mean, it'd only be 10 minutes away for him.
Yeah, yeah.
So he would come over 3 or 4 times a week sometimes because he would be doing his commentary. Now, he also had his show on Monday night, which started it started at PTF and then moved over to Hillsborough Street when they had renovations or they were moving to a new building and that kind of thing. But I started doing all of the coaches' shows with Jim when they moved over. Mm-hmm. But he was still coming by 3 or 4 times a week to do his commentary. He wanted it to be fresh and that kind of thing. And so we were putting up on the network.
Where are all these commentaries? Are they in a trash bin somewhere on a cassette?
I have.
Might have I recorded over one without realizing it?
Yeah, it could have been one of your mixtapes, you know.
See, that's the wild part to me because I always feel like I think some people think that we do a good job of archiving things. That's actually far from the truth.
Well, we have the basketball games down the hall here.
Yes, all on cassette.
All on cassette. Because that's all we had at the time, really.
Yes,
you know, you didn't want to have a game on reel to reel.
No,
you know, it would be way too long, way too big. So we do.
So I'm guessing there's got to be some gems.
We've got cassettes down the hall.
Okay, I'm gonna have to pull some of those.
We have we have the 1987 ACC championship game, and that was a really special one because. Jim's birthday is March 10th, or his birthday was March 10th. And, of course, that was the Monday night, March 10th, after the ACC championship game. And Jim was really proud. Now, yeah, they had won the 83 championship and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But he was really proud of this team. He had no idea they would ever make it. If you look at the roster, it wasn't chock full.
Yeah.
You know, and here's Vinny Del Negro, who really blossomed in the last half of the year. You had Benny Bolton, Avi Lester. We had Mike Giomi. You know, he just this team just came together against Carolina on that one day in March of '87 and won the championship. On that Monday night, I mean, he got calls from all over the country. I was recording these people. They just started calling in out of the clear blue earlier in the day. I mean, Lou Carnesecca called in, Bob Costas called in, Dick Vitale called in.
Sure.
It was just amazing. I had at least 10 people on tape. So when we had the coaches show, I was able to just plug these different. Jim, I want to wish you a happy birthday.
Did he know that these people had called in?
No.
He was surprised.
He had no idea.
No idea, okay.
And so, yeah, I want to wish you a happy birthday, but you know what? I also want to wish you good job on winning the ACC tournament.
Nice.
You know, stuff like that. You know.
Now, I recently read John Feinstein's book, Legends Club, which highlights the relationship. It specifically highlights the relationship of Mike Krzyzewski at Duke and Jim Valvano at State, and then Dean Smith in there, and how over time they all kind of came together. And the picture that Feinstein paints of Valvano is one where he could never really turn it off basketball. That he's always talking about basketball. Sometimes he would just hold court in his office with random people from all walks of life, not necessarily related to the basketball program. He would get home late, they would have food or whatever it is. He just liked being around people. I would imagine that this also extended itself during those radio sessions where he's just talking about basketball with you.
Well, before the show started, Jim would always be very quiet. He would be answering mail by hand. He would be doing stuff by hand, doing all this different stuff. But when the show ended, he would come out and he'd go, "Hey, I want to talk about the next game coming up on Thursday night. So we've got Georgia Tech coming up Thursday night. Rusty, come over here and help me." And he'd start diagramming on a legal pad, just diagramming plays, just going crazy. He'd be going, "Well, what do you think? I could do this and I could do that. They've got this player. They've got that player. What do you think? What do you think?" And I said, "Well, they may come out and do this." "Oh, I'm ready for that." And he'd have a second set of defense.
Okay.
I would say, "Well, what if you did this?" And what if you did that? We did this every Monday night. Every other time when he'd come in, he'd have a big game coming up.
Yeah.
So I would be watching the game, and I'd be going, oh, he's going to change defenses now. Boom. This is what he's going to. Hey, Norma, look. This is what they're going to do, You
were talking about this the other night in the office.
But this is crazy. I mean, it was nuts. And the one thing I tried to stress with you earlier, if someone had if you had a really good idea, Jim would listen to you. He would listen to everybody. It was like he was a machine, just compiling this. And the other thing I said was that I don't know how much sleep he got. Because this was like,
it was
he could not turn it off.
Yeah.
He was basketball all the time. And, I mean, when he hired Don Shea to take care of, some of his business dealings after 83, I mean, that was for a big reason because Jim wanted to think about basketball. Jim wanted to, his whole focus was basketball during the season.
But he also was interested in other things, which would bring those Valvano's viewpoints. And then towards the end of his run at NC State, he was also doing television and what. There's always the thought that he could have been like a late night host if he really wanted to be. But obviously this comes into play with the end of his tenure at NC State and the ugliness of the Peter Goldenbach book and everything else. What was his general demeanor around that time when he was coming in for a Valvano's viewpoint? I mean, in this day and age, if you've got your own platform, you could just, spend 4 minutes, putting the book on blast if you wanted to. So what was his general demeanor when all this stuff was going on at NC State and his eventual exit?
Well, he really didn't think he had done anything wrong.
Yeah.
And that was the premise throughout. So he just would talk about basketball. Now, one thing he really wanted to do, because he had started doing some television and different things, and he was in demand after the 83. I mean, he was in demand everywhere to give speeches, motivational speeches, any of this stuff. But he wanted a monorail from the main campus.
Hold up. Because when I was at NC State, there was always, it was almost a gag that there was a monorail that was supposed to go from NC State's campus to Centennial campus.
That's correct.
That's a Jim Valvano idea?
That was a Jim Valvano idea.
Oh, I did not know that.
One time I had a turnaround with the BBC with a math professor from NC State, and she verified. He wanted the monorail to go by RAL-TV, which was an ABC affiliate at the time, and say we opened the broadcast on ABC with
monorail.
And we had the monorail, and then we could have, this has to be really visionary.
Yeah.
Because on the left side, of course, we're going to have the chapel on Nazareth Street.
Yeah, well, that's where Cardinal Gibbons. I mean, that's where I went to high school. So
yes, and now
that's where the cathedral is.
Now that's where the cathedral is. But as you got to Centennial Campus, we want our high-tech buildings on the left side and on the right side, and a lot of greenery. And then at the very end, that's where I want the Coliseum to be.
Yeah, I always knew
that's where I
that.
want the basketball arena to be.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people that think, oh, they had it out by Carter Stadium and all this. No, he wanted it at the end there at Centennial Campus.
Yes.
He said, because when ABC comes on the air, said what they're going to see is the learning that's going on at NC State. This is what we're doing, and basketball is at the end of it. Jim always talked about academics a lot more. He read,
but that wasn't the way
voraciously,
it was portrayed.
not portrayed. Well, to me, it was not because he read all the time. And when he would recruit someone, there was a player from Miami. He said, "Rusty, I went to Miami, and it was just not a good neighborhood." He said, I want that kid to come to Raleigh. I really want that kid to come to Raleigh. And I would even want him to maybe go to maybe a prep school for 2 years. I want him to get some education. I want him to see what life is like outside of that neighborhood.
A lot of people talked about how they were in Reynolds for the reunion of the 1983 team and everything else. For all the times you were in Reynolds Coliseum and around for all those things, you weren't there for that.
No, I was really, really sick. A lot of people thought we were there.
I would assume that you were.
Dick Sheridan thought we were there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a lot of people who thought we were there. Norma and I were really, we were flu-like symptoms beyond. It was just that we could not, very seldom am I ever out of work. But
Rusty,
but we
for
could
folks who have no idea, Rusty's here all the time.
We had to get people to come in and work that
Yeah.
usually weren't doing that, because
Yeah.
Norma and I worked game day. We worked the games.
Yeah.
But we had to get people to come in and work. It was just amazing how sick we were that day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really a blessing, because we were able to, listen to this speech without any interruption, without anything, and we were just able to absorb it.
To absorb it all.
Did
Did Valvano come through at any point? Like, with all of his work after the fact, he was doing so much TV and he's working games. What was the relationship after he left Tennessee State? Did you keep up with him? Did he drop by? What was that like?
It wasn't quite, he wasn't coming by 4 times a week.
Sure.
Anymore. But we still remained in contact. I was going over to NC State one day, and I was going by the bell tower, and I was walking over to the supply store to get a T-shirt, and probably still have that T-shirt. You've probably seen it.
I've probably seen it,
You've probably seen it. But he stops his car right out in front of the bell tower and goes, he stops traffic. And he goes, "What you doing on my turf?" And for me, for someone who grew up right there, that's where I grew up. It was really, really an odd scene, because I was like, "That's Jim." I said, "I'm just going over to near Reynolds," and it was just a really odd thing, but it was still his turf.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. I feel like, you tell me these stories, and I think to myself, I'm like, man, everything seems so cordial and almost community driven, which is not the case now. Every schools and the media arms that go along with it are very very separated now, very very separated, and I feel like there's a lost connection there that you got to experience that I've never been able to experience, really. So, do you get it, like how those things have evolved, from those times where Jim Valvano can stop traffic to kind of give you some crap, to where we are today, where you don't really see anybody?
Yeah. Well, he was friends with Norm and I, and there weren't 10 people there when we did the coaches show.
Yeah.
It was just
There
Norm.
was no assistant SID. There wasn't some sort of marketing person. There wasn't a camera.
There was no one there telling him what to say or what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just Norma and me and Jim, and Don Shea would come by, because remember, Don had been on the air his whole life.
Right.
Had podcasts. But when Jim started his show, you didn't know what he was going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
We just
go ahead and do it.
Flew by the seat of our pants, and away we went.
Any other coaches that came through to that were like that, or did just kind of the dynamic was just a little bit more business-like?
Well, I did Coach K's show.
Mm-hmm.
I did Red Wilson's show. I did some of the Duke shows coming along. I did the Tennessee Titans coach's show.
Tennessee Titans?
Jeff Fisher. I did the Jeff Fisher show.
Wait, we carried the Tennessee Titans?
We carried the we carried.
I had no idea.
We carried the Tennessee Titans.
Okay.
So,
all right.
So Norm and I, at one point, we were doing the production for Duke, State, Virginia Tech, the Redskins, and we did the Redskins, and Norm and I did the production for the Redskins when Frank, Sonny, and Sam were there.
Yeah.
In fact, the Redskins lost all their commercials in an airport one Friday afternoon, and I had to reproduce everything.
Yeah.
And Norma had to come by and pick me up, and they held the FedEx plane up for us. And I must have gone 70 miles per hour on Highway 70 to get out there. Mm-hmm. But we made it, and we pulled our car up on the guy motioned for us, and we pulled our car up on the tarmac and handed him the commercials for their broadcast on Sunday. And they took off. And they said, "Gosh, we can't believe you did that." And I said, "Well, it had to be done.
Had to be done.
Had
right?
to be done.
You can't email it like
but
you
we
can
did
now,
we did the Redskins.
Yeah.
And we started doing the Titans when they were still the Houston Oilers.
Yeah.
And then we did the Tennessee Titans until 2009 when we moved over here.
I did not know that. That is new knowledge to me.
Yeah.
And you're still doing this, Rusty.
I'm still
here. I see you
perking away.
The technology has changed. It's not cassettes, but it's computers and editors and everything else, and you're still doing this.
Well, people thought when it was just had long fingernails and I was prying tape apart, they said, "Oh, when it goes digital, Rusty probably won't have a job," because they used to see me with these long fingernails and stuff.
Russ, you're gonna put out to pasture because of the technology change, huh?
But all the guys at the Buzz, like Tim Chastain, Ted Sawyer, number one. Ted would call up and he'd go, "Rusty, I've got this commercial. Can you find some music for me for this commercial?"
Yeah.
So I was in touch, but a lot of the people all across the state knew who we were because of the network. State had 30 stations. Duke had 20 or 30 stations. We were uplinking Carolina, so we knew the stations there.
You were a vital link to making things go on the air.
We were doing East Carolina. We were doing all these other schools and the Titans and other ones. And I mean, there's a lot of people, and some of them were blind, who knew who we were.
Just like me, making sure that those NC State baseball games got on the air at WKNC back in that 1999 time frame. Now, I feel like we skipped a couple of steps here, and I asked you about the Reynolds speech, which a lot of folks from around here will always tell you was a much more impactful speech. And because of the context, it was Reynolds, it was 83, and also where he was at that point in his cancer. When did you find out that Jim Valvano had cancer?
Well,
because everything that I've ever read is that he did an amazing job of keeping it, his spirits were always high. He always was energetic. He did his best. He never lost his hair. So when people found out just how bad the situation was, they're almost surprised. How did you find out?
Well, Pam called me, I guess it was in June 1992, and I was in the newsroom, and Pam gave him a call, and I heard a lot of background noise and stuff. I knew she wasn't at home. And she said, "Rusty, are you sitting down?" And I said, "No, that's not good." And so Pam said, "I'm at the mall. My mind's starting to race a little bit." And she goes, "Yes, I'm at the mall. I'm away from the girls." And I went, "I'm sitting down." And she said, "People from all over the world have talked to me, and all the money in the world is available to me. But, Jim went to play golf the other day." And I said, "Yeah, I know that." And she said, "Well, he went to the doctor because he had felt a twinge in his back." And she said, "All the money in the world is not going to do any good. It's all over him. And they're giving him 2 months to live." And I went, "Pam, I'm so sorry." And I'm thanking her because she wanted to talk to me before she met the media, before it was announced. And my heart just went out to her at that time because she was going home. After she talked to me, she was going to go home and tell the girls. Whew. And that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
That's really hard. So she wanted to, if I was a practice dummy, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You know. But she wanted me to know. And Jim and I had been friends for so long, and of course I'd known Pam for a long time too. And this is the same Pam that in summer times would put Jim on a diet and hang a suit in the closet and say, you've got to get into that by the end of the summer, because he'd gain weight during basketball season.
Mm-hmm.
But, I didn't expect any of this, but I wanted to thank her at the end of this and just say, Pam, you were always a very gracious lady and just so very nice, and I just really appreciated her letting me know before anybody else like that. And that was basically the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I knew Kay Yao real well,
mm-hmm.
and she had cancer. I held her up in the studio while she cut a breast cancer awareness spot. And I'm going to end on a good note by saying that I got Kay out of the studio and I sat her in the newsroom, and time was short for Kay at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And Sylvia Hatchell gave me a call. And Sylvia said, Rusty, how's Kay? And I said, well, hold on a second, Sylvia. She's sitting in the newsroom. And I was able to hand the phone off from Sylvia to Kay so they could speak. And it just was just a great moment for me because they were such close friends. And that was a good way probably to end this, because I don't have anything else to say.
Well, Rusty, this was the reason why I wanted to do this, because part of this podcast series was telling smaller stories that tie into a lot of larger stories, and you're certainly a part of that. Because of if people liked hearing things on the radio, well, you're a reason why those things managed to happen, Rusty.
Yeah. And the dichotomy of all this is, and you've heard me say this, all of the energy that Jim had the whole time I was around him. My conversation with Terry Gannon, and this wasn't real long ago, and Terry Gannon said, there's no way I could have done all of this if I hadn't come here and played for Jim, if I hadn't been around him. He inspired me to do a lot of the things that I've done. And then to hear Pam's words trying to explain this to me, that jolted me. And, the next thing I knew, I was in the studio with Tony Haynes, and we were doing a Jim Valvano Remembered 30-minute program or hour-long program. And that's the last thing I remember of all this. I've tried to put the rest of it aside. Well,
I appreciate you being willing to talk about this today, because I think it's very, very important. Thank you, Rusty.
Thank you, Joe.
A brief history of Triangle Sports, sponsored by Copiers Plus, your local office equipment and solutions provider. Take the mystery out of your printing expenses by scheduling your free print audit today at copiers-plus.com.